how do we share the gospel? Now, sharing the gospel can sound incredibly scary, right? Incredibly intimidating. It's very easy to think, I don't know enough to share the gospel with somebody. So let's break this down a little bit. The gospel is simply the story of who God is and what he's doing. We tell stories all the time about things we know, about things we don't know. We're always telling stories. But whenever we're telling this story, there's just a couple big pieces to keep in mind, right? A couple big themes that we need to tell the whole story in its fullness. First is that there is a God. There's a personal being who is all powerful, all loving, all good, all caring. That kind of God exists. And that kind of God doesn't exist just off somewhere, removed from us. He's actually the same God who made us. That's kind of the next point of the story. This part of the story, you could call it the chapter of creation, right? There's a God who made all things and made all things out of an overflow of his love and made them good, made them right, made things so that they flourished, made things so that there would be a fullness of life that reflects the fullness of his life. But obviously, I don't live in a world like that. You don't live in a world like that. Something went wrong. And that's kind of the next chapter of this story, the fall. Right? The fall is the part of the story where everything goes wrong, where we reject the one who made us. We reject this all good, all loving God. And so things start to fall apart. We start to fall apart, but also everything in creation starts to fall apart. And all the problems that we face, all the difficulties, all the longing that we feel comes kind of in that chapter of the story. But God didn't say, well, that one got messed up. Let's move on to the next thing. He came out of his love for the world he had made and the people he had made to restore us, to make us new again, to redeem us, to buy us back from everything that had us in its power that would take us from him, right? And that story, right, so much of the scriptures is about this part of the story. Everything from the calling of Abraham to the Exodus, all the way through the Old Testament, but ultimately culminating in Jesus. As the fulfillment of this restoration work, Jesus comes to rescue us from all that has broken us, from all that has power over us, from all that we have done to reject him. Now that redemption, as we experience it, isn't full, isn't done, isn't over, right? There's another step to this good news, this gospel story, a day where he will return and make all things new, where everything that has been begun will be finished, all that is wrong will be made right, all evil will be conquered, and all goodness will be recognized for what it is. Those are the basic chapters of the story. Those are the basic ideas. And when we're sharing the gospel, the main things to remember in each one of those is God is the hero, and we're invited to participate. That's why it's necessary to share the gospel, right? This is news that we might not know otherwise unless God had told us, unless God had showed us. But it's also news that invites us to participate in it. It's very different from a newscast of something happening on the other side of the world. It's not that kind of news that we just look at and we can feel sorry for, or we can feel excited about. This is news that invites us to participate. And so in sharing the gospel, we're telling this story and saying, hey, this can be your story too. Now, as we're doing this, as we're sharing this gospel, there is a common misconception that in order to do that thing, to share the gospel, you've got to share it all at once, the whole story, beginning to end, all the ins and outs of it, right? And sometimes that's really appropriate. And sometimes it's an absolute gift to be able to sit down with someone who's curious and be able to do that. But more often in conversations, I find that I have opportunities to share smaller parts of that story, smaller pieces of that story that kind of enter the story halfway in. The way I often think about sharing the gospel is start with some aspect of the fall that a person is experiencing, right? Is someone experiencing guilt? Is someone just found out about a terminal illness? Is someone stuck in an addiction? All these fit right into that chapter 2 of the fall, that the world is not the way it's supposed to be. I often find that starting there allows me to say, well, yeah, it sounds like you're really wrestling with guilt, right? That must be really difficult. But did you know there's a God who loves you and made you and has actually created a way not to be stuck in this guilt? Has actually made a way for your heart to be free and forgiven? I know a God like that. I'd love to tell you about him. Or if someone is walking through a terminal illness, man, that is not the way it's supposed to be. I'm so sorry, but I actually believe in a God who is not conquered by death, but who has conquered death and who resurrects bodies. If you'd like to know more about that, I'd love to talk to you about it. So often it's those small ends, those small ways of just helping people see on-ramps into that 4-part story that creates a curiosity for that longer conversation.